And so my sharing today is based upon that gospel reading from Luke's Gospel, chapter 5, and verses 1 to 11. Now, I'm hoping that some of you have, but I wonder if any of you have ever watched any of those Mission Impossible franchise films. There's one or two heads nodding, that's good. And you'll know, the main star is Tom Cruise, who plays the role of Ethan Hunt. And if you've seen them, then you will know that they always start with Ethan Hunt, in some predicament, and there's some object, whether it's a cassette player, a record player, or something that plays the mission that he has to, fulfill, as it were. And the voice on the recording says, "Your mission, should you choose to accept it." Mission impossible. And as we read Luke's account of this catch of fish, so we see here something of the same. Mission impossible. Not only do we see the miracle, but we also see Jesus calling Simon, or Peter, to a changed role. But also, if we scratch the surface, so we see something of what we might term relational tensions. We see frustration and doubt, skepticism, patience, acceptance. And we see too Peter's awareness of himself being both challenged and changed. Mission impossible. As Luke records for us, what we see is Peter and his pals had been fishing nights. Their shift was over, and all they wanted to do was wash their nets, wrap things up, and get some sleep. Further up on the shore, Jesus had gathered a crowd which was rapidly growing. And seeing the fishing boats pulled up, sort of half in and half out of the water, Jesus says to Peter, "Hey, can I use your boat and your services? Won't be long, crowd to teach. If you could push out a short way from the shore, then I'll have a better vantage point." Now, Peter just wants to finish up, but that's not happening. And then, just as he thinks Jesus is coming to the end of this long spiel, Peter hears him say, "Now then, let's go fishing. Let's go out into deep water and let's have a go. Your mission, if you choose to accept it." And we can imagine Peter, "What? With all of my experience, I know there's no chance of catching anything. What does this carpenter boy know about fishing? Clearly nothing. Deep water, daylight, these nets have only got a shallow draft. We're not going to catch anything. I just want to pack up and go home." But Jesus is patient. Peter relents. And deep water it is. And we see that Peter is pushed past the limits of his experience. And suddenly he's not just hearing about a miracle, he's right in the middle of one. More fish than you can shake a stick at. Mission impossible. And slowly, almost unnoticed amongst all of the fish, Peter's gaze turns towards himself. And we'll come back to that. But I wonder, for us today, as we look around us, as we look at the world, as we look at our communities, our families, I wonder what we might long for that just appears to be impossible. Tongue in cheek, we might say politicians to be honest. Being a little bit more serious, we might say conflict to cease, equity and justice, relationships healed, lives changed, mission impossible. But what if we were then to bring that a little closer to home? What about our lives, this church? What might Jesus be saying to us? Follow me out into deep water. Mission impossible. Because so often as we look at these situations from, out there in the world and world leadership, right here closer to home, so often we can find ourselves, if not saying, then certainly thinking, with all of my experience, I know there's just no chance. There's no chance these things will change. There's no chance that things will get better. It's just not going to happen. Faith. There was a story told of the young boy, and he was traveling to see his grandparents, and he was flying, and his parents had put him on one of those sort of, chaperone flights and left him. So the little boy is sat next to a professor. And to pass the time, the little boy brings out some of his stuff that he was doing at Sunday school. And the professor has sort of leaned over and noticed this and thought, I'll have a little bit of fun here. So the professor says, young man, if you can tell me something that God can do, I'll give you this apple. Well, the little boy was sharp. And so he thought for a moment, and then he replied, Mister, if you can tell me something God can't do, I'll give you a big bag full of apples. Faith. Today, is Jesus asking us individually, together as his people here in this place, is he asking us to put out into deep water, to trust him, to take the risk of looking foolish, the risk of failure? Is he asking us to step outside the limits of our experience and trust him? Whatever we might think, whatever others might say, is Jesus asking us to expect a miracle? It's been said that there's two kinds of people. The first kind looks at the problem and says, it can't be done. The second kind looks at the opportunity and says, if it could be done, how would we do it? And as we look at this incident, I said a moment ago, Peter's gaze was turned towards himself. And Luke records for us his reaction. And it's not what we might expect. This miraculous catch of fish, Jesus has just boosted Peter's company share value. He's just provided for him and his family for who knows how long. You think Peter would be jumping, but no. Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man. And what we see is how, in light of the miracle, in light of God's presence, Peter starts to see more of his true self. Society today, with all of its sort of self-help therapy, its focus upon self-creation, making ourselves, society constantly tells us that we can create or recreate ourselves. We can make ourselves better. We can be or become whoever we want. And yet we see that Peter, as he encounters God, discovers the truth of that all but forgotten doctrine of total depravity. That view from within the Christian church, which states that humanity is completely affected by sin, that we cannot save ourselves, but it's only through God's grace, through faith, can we be saved. Only through faith can our true relationship with God and with ourselves be restored. Today, the church seems to have pushed that sort of teaching, that doctrine, quietly to the periphery. And yet here, Peter encounters it, as do many through the pages of the New Testament. And yet, Jesus, hearing Peter, Jesus doesn't say, well, you know, I think you're right. You're beyond hope. No, Jesus says, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. And Peter encounters love, non-judgmental, unconditional love. So often, as individuals today, we can be afraid to face ourselves, afraid of what we might find. And so we fill our lives with other things. We try to make ourselves better. We try to convince ourselves. And yet, like Peter, when we allow ourselves to rest in God's presence, so we encounter love, non-judgmental, unconditional love. We meet with a God who says, I'll do this, but I want you to do that. I'll change your life. I'll help you find your true self because I love you. All I want you to do is tell others. They don't need to do DIY. They don't need to try and change themselves. They simply need to know that they are loved, known, and valued by God, and that He'll do the rest. Amen.